Hi, everybody. It's time for another update, and everyone has a lot of questions about Omicron. And so I'm going to structure the report a little bit differently this time. Let me go ahead and share my screen with you. I'm going to start by talking about variants, and then we'll get into all of the rest of the demographic data that I usually give you. So unfortunately, there is a persistent global rise, and hotspots are really in Europe and the US. In spite of all this attention on South Africa, Europe and the US really have the highest numbers right now. Cases are rising in the US and in California, and hospitalizations are rising again in the US. We're sort of at a plateau in California with regard to that. Vaccination is getting a little uptick recently, and mortality, unfortunately, is again rising in the US with a plateau in California. So just to start us off with the variants, since everyone has the most interest in this topic right now, Delta remains over 99% of all cases in the US, even though there's so much news right now about Omicron. You can see over here on the side, Omicron is listed and it's at 0%. That doesn't mean that there's no cases. It just means that it hasn't even reached enough to make a number of a percent yet. You can see over here that Omicron, although it was first reported in South Africa, was probably circulating in multiple countries already by that time. And when you look at what we know so far, we do have some data already about Omicron now. And you can see this is data out of South Africa. You can see that their wave of Omicron, the slope of their curve of how fast cases have increased in comparison to their other surges of COVID-19, this has a much steeper curve. It is happening at a much more rapid rate is what that means. And you can see that daily cases are going up. The weekly share of tests that are positive is going up. And unfortunately, weekly hospital admissions are also now going up. You can see, though, that with regard to severity, although these are very early days and we really cannot make any firm conclusions yet, when you look at the sort of curve of how many patients are actually ending up in the ICU and actually on ventilator machines, that is a much, much lower curve than in the Delta wave. So this does appear that at least in the patients in South Africa, this is a less severe disease. Now you have to keep in mind that in South Africa, less than 30% of the population is vaccinated. However, because of their prior surges and because of that low vaccination rate, they actually do have quite a high prior infection rate. And so that may be playing a role. And overall, the population is younger than many other countries, and that may also be playing a role as how severe this is showing up in their databases. When you look at the United States, Omicron is present. It's present in many, many states. And you can see that California is one of those states. But as far as here in Santa Clara County, you can see that there are no cases thus far that have been found of Omicron here in Santa Clara County. And then this is the latest news flash about Omicron, that there may be a stealth version. Really what that means is that there are two lineages. There's the BA.1 and the BA.2, and one of them does not have a mutation that was allowing it to be picked up on PCR tests. So many people use PCR tests as a screening device for COVID-19. And these sort of mutations that were being seen on the PCR testing, actually a missing mutation that allowed us to identify Omicron, is not missing on the other lineage. And so we may not actually have a firm grasp on how many cases of Omicron there really are. Now, there are many places also that don't use PCR, or in addition to PCR, use genomic testing. And genomic testing definitely does pick up on Omicron variants. And here at Stanford, we are using genomic testing. And so we are able to identify and know which one people have. You can see here this really interesting data. This was done really, really quickly in the Siegel lab. And you can see that this is looking at the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine and looking at it live virus, but in a lab setting, not in people, but in a lab setting. And you can see that the neutralizing antibodies that are produced in reaction to the Delta variant versus Omicron variant, there's quite a high drop off. It's actually a 40-fold decrease in neutralizing antibodies versus Omicron variant. But what you can also see is that when patients have had the vaccine, both doses, and they have had a prior infection, although there is still that drop off in antibody production, it still remains well above the cutoff of what we think is necessary to mount a response. And so that is why people may still get infected with Omicron variant, but our ability to fight that off and not become very sick remains quite good if you have had prior infection and the vaccine. You can also see this is another study that was done. It's using a pseudovirus, so a slightly different type of technique. And they did not find as large of a drop off in neutralizing antibody effect, only a 7-fold drop off. However, they did note that this was likely based on differing patient populations compared to the Siegel Lab study. And they did note that the WHO neutralizing standard, which is a pooled early plasma assay, kind of matched that 40-fold drop that was seen in the other study. So now that we've talked about the variants, let's get into the data about vaccination and cases. So you can see the US still is hovering right under 60% of our total population vaccinated and under all of the countries that it has been under for all these months. You can see that almost close to 200 million people in the US are fully vaccinated now, with close to 50 million getting a booster dose. And you can see in the age over 65 group, we're actually doing not so bad at 86.6%. When you look at new administered doses, we're now up to 1.78 million doses per day, which is better than it was and is sort of steadily climbing. And this isn't just based on the fact that people are getting additional booster doses. This is the fact that people are now starting to get the initial vaccine more so than they were before in September and October. So that is good news for all of us. And that allows us to predict that by May of next year, perhaps we'll have around 94% of the population fully vaccinated. When you look at what percent of each state is fully vaccinated, you can see there are the same holdouts that we're familiar with. Mississippi, Alabama, Idaho, and Wyoming tend to remain quite low in their overall percent of vaccination, but some states are picking up the pace a little bit. You can see West Virginia, which was lagging for a long time, is now picking up vaccination a bit, as well as Virginia and Wisconsin having significant increases over the last 2 weeks. And in California, you can see that we were kind of stagnating as far as how many vaccination doses we were getting, and now we are climbing again, which is good news. You can see that 68.6% of our population is fully vaccinated. And when you look at this broken down by age, unfortunately, our age over 65 population remains to lag behind the total population. You can see we're still just down in the 70s, whereas the US population over 65 is at 86.6%. So we really have to encourage our friends and neighbors who may be elderly, our family members who may be elderly, that this is an important thing to do. And you can see that at least here in Santa Clara County, we are doing quite well in all age groups, whether it's age over 17, the age 5 to 17, and even in our elderly population, we have a 95% vaccination rate. So we're doing quite well here. When you look at global cases, the number unfortunately just continues to climb. And you can see that here in graph form, that we have had a 7% increase over the last 2 weeks. You can see we are fully into our fourth surge as a global community. And when you look at the hotspots, again, although South Africa has been most in the news, the actual case numbers are much worse in Western and Central Europe, as well as in the United States. And when you look at our cases compared to Europe, you can see that although they took this sharp rise earlier than we did, we are now starting to climb to reach them. And when you look at just these selected countries with rising case rates compared to the US, you can see that Belgium, which was sort of this very sharp exponential increase for the last few weeks, has now finally come down off their peak, which is great to see for them. But you can see that the UK, France, Germany, they're all still quite high. The US is still climbing. And then I put South Africa on here just so that you could again see that, as far as the actual case numbers, although they are rising, they certainly don't even reach ours yet. When you look at the US in particular, you can see this steep curve at the end of our graph, and there has been this increase in the last 2 weeks. You can see that the hot spots are sort of the same as they have been, the northern part of this central to northeast area that's slowly spreading down as temperatures drop across the US, although that has not hit us here yet in the Pacific Northwest and California, which may be because of our more temperate temperatures up to this point this winter. When you look at California cases, you can see that they are rising over the last 2 weeks, up 36% actually over the last 2 weeks. And you can see that Santa Clara County, it does also have a little bit of a spike. And San Mateo County also, if you look down there at cases by episode date, does have this small spike at the end of the graph. When you look at Stanford, there were 30 cases in the last week, which is more than what we have seen in the last several weeks. But overall, our positivity rate is still quite low, overall 0.09%, and in the last week, 0.25%, which is still much less than overall Santa Clara County at 1.5% and California, which is at 2.2%. And the same holds true for the Stanford faculty, postdocs, and staff, where we're holding quite well, just 10 cases in the last week, and in the last 7 days, just 0.09% positivity rate. When we think about the pediatric population, some interesting and perhaps concerning news out of South Africa is that there has been a sharp increase in hospitalized children with COVID-19, and they are reporting that the age group that is being hospitalized at the highest rate is still the over 60 population, but in their ages 5 and younger, that is the second highest rate of all age groups. And so that's certainly something different than what we have seen before, and something that we should keep an eye on as far as why that is. But it is important to note that the majority of those children getting hospitalized have unvaccinated parents. Here in the US, we continue to hold just under 0.25% of our share of cases being pediatric cases, a 4% increase over the last week or 2 weeks. But here, at least so far, probably because Delta is still the reigning variant in the US, our hospitalizations and mortality continue to remain low. As far as hospitalizations go overall, we are continuing to increase overall in the US. And in California, we have this sort of plateau. Unfortunately, we never came back down to our good baseline that we were at before. And so we'll have to see if this continues to go up or go down or what happens. You can see this is similar for all age groups across the state. And in Santa Clara County, unfortunately, the plateau has remained above our prior baseline. And in San Mateo County, in fact, the plateau seems to be increasing over the last several days. When you look at San Francisco itself, there is a new increase in hospitalizations. You can see in this graph that we were coming really down nicely for quite a while, but in the last few days, there has been an uptick in hospitalizations. And across the Bay Area, there's been a plateau, but a 8.8% increase over the last 2 weeks in that plateau. When we finally look at mortality, unfortunately, there is an uptick. We were coming down for a while, and now it's increasing again. And that averages to about 1,000 Americans every single day dying of COVID-19. So although, we are 2 years into a pandemic and these numbers may seem repetitive and not mean much, when you really sit and think about what that means, 1,000 fellow Americans dying every single day of this disease, we really need to all band together to try to get a grip on this, get a handle on this. When you look at California, there has been a plateau to slight decrease in our mortality, thankfully, and the same holds true for Santa Clara County. I'll just show you again that US cases and deaths according to vaccination status, remember that you are 5 times as likely to contract the virus if you have not been vaccinated, and you are 13 times as likely to die from this virus if you have not been vaccinated. So definitely something to consider. And then because a lot of people have asked me, what does it mean if you had a prior infection and you've been vaccinated, how protected are you? And there is some good new data coming out about this, that robust immune responses are being observed after even just 1 dose of the vaccine if you've had a prior infection. And this is sort of, again, repeated information, repeated findings that confirm that information in this study, showing that previous infection combined with vaccination produces neutralizing antibodies with good potency against the variants even. Now we'll have to see what happens with the Omicron variant, but thus far, against the variants that we have had, this has been holding true. So with that, I'll stop sharing. I hope that that was good information for everyone and it answered a lot of the questions that you may have been having. And I hope all of you remain safe and healthy as we enter the holiday season. I will see you next time.